Welcome to the PCN Capitol Preview. I'm Larry Casper. Immigration is our topic today. You can join our discussion by calling us at 1-877-PA6-5001, or you can text us at 717-219-4001. But first, we're joined by Marc Levy from the Associated Press. You filed a story about a bill that would speed up the processing of mail-in ballots, Marc. How long does it take right now?
Right. It depends on the election, but what we saw in the 2020 presidential election was that news agencies, news organizations couldn't project a winner of the presidential election until the Saturday after the election, which, was held on a Tuesday. So the counties were counting mail-in ballots 24 hours a day consistently until enough of them were counted and news organizations were able to project a winner in a close race between Joe Biden and Donald Trump. That's the fear again, is that in this year, this presidential election, that it will take days again to project a winner because of the counting of mail-in ballots takes a significant time after polls close.
So how would a proposed bill shorten that time to process the mail-in ballots?
Right. So this is a bill that passed the House on a party line vote last week, and it was sponsored by Democrats, supported by Democrats, and goes to the Senate, where its fate is uncertain in a Republican-controlled Senate. But essentially what it would do is it would give counties the ability to start processing these ballots up to 7 days before polls close, before Election Day, so that these ballots could be removed from envelopes, flattened out, and essentially sent through vote tabulating machinery, so that as soon as polls close on Election Day, an election administrator can hit a button and these votes will be tabulated and entered into the official tally that we have to watch as votes are counted and the votes come in from the in-person polling places. As it is now, under the current law, Pennsylvania is one of the only states that doesn't let these mail-in ballots be processed until Election Day. The vast majority of states allow this to happen in the days and weeks before polls close. And so if the task begins on Election Day, it drags on potentially for days beyond polls when polls close, and especially in a close election, which this is expected to be again between Joe Biden and Donald Trump. It could be beyond Election Day when news organizations are able to project a winner of the race.
Now, when opening ballots before Election Day, that process is usually referred to as pre-canvassing. And how was that figure of 7 days arrived at, Marc, as far as counties could process mail-in ballots as far ahead of Election Day as 7 days?
7 days is not necessarily a magic number. Some states have 3 days, some have more than that. Some don't even have anything in their law that says that gives a certain time frame. So for counties, this, in theory, is more than enough time for them to do the job. Lawmakers here in this state have talked about 3 days in the past, but 7 days is certainly an adequate amount of time that counties have sought for this before the election. The thing that they've said all along is that once Election Day arrives, they're really focused on trying to carry out the in-person vote. And so giving them only Election Day and thereafter to process these ballots means they're sort of conducting two different elections at the same time. Giving them 7 days before the election would, in theory, let them dispense of the processing and then on Election Day turn their attention to the in-person vote. Now, about 2.5 million mail-in ballots came in the presidential election in 2020. In the 2022 election, which was the midterm election when there were contests for governor and Senate, we saw about half the number of mail-in ballots come in, and races were called that night. Counties are getting better at counting mail-in ballots. They have higher speed processing equipment than they had in 2020, but it's not clear how long it would take them to process 2.5 million ballots at this point.
Mark, Republicans have concerns about opening the door to fraud as far as this pre-canvassing is concerned. Can you tell us why they believe that?
It's not actually clear to me what they're basing that on, considering that just about every state in the nation allows these ballots to be processed in advance. I can talk to you about what they said during debate, which is that election workers will have access to these ballots and be opening them. I think there's been a theory in the past that that the results would leak out in advance. I'm not aware of that ever happening in any state that allows these ballots to be processed in advance. I mean, these ballots are processed in advance in Democratic states and Republican states. And if there's been some sort of fraud associated with that, or some sort of leaking of the vote count in advance illegally, I'm not aware of that.
Last question, Mark. Do lawmakers want to get this done so it can take effect for our November election?
The counties have said that they would like this to be enforced for the November election without a doubt. Now, what the Republicans who control the Senate have said that they're not going to do it unless it comes packaged with a stronger voter identification requirement that's enshrined in the Constitution. I'm not sure how that happens before November because that requires passage in 2 consecutive legislative sessions plus approval in a referendum by voters. Look, counties have been seeking this since 2020. They've asked year in and year out, and it's been opposed by Republicans. The only time Republicans have been willing to vote for it is when it was packaged with a bunch of other election-related provisions that Democrats opposed. So the prospects for this taking effect and being enforced for the November election are not good.
Thank you very much, Marc Levy from the Associated Press. More PCN Capitol Preview after a short break. Welcome back. Our guests are Representative Donna Scheuren, Republican from Montgomery County, and Representative Joe Hohenstein, Democrat from Philadelphia. A recent Gallup poll reported that immigration is at the top of the list of the most important problems for Americans. Representative Hohenstein, why do you suppose that is?
Well, it's because people have an emotional connection to our country. And the interesting thing that I would let folks know is the immigrants coming also have an emotional connection to our country. They see the ideals of freedom and the idea of the United States being a beacon for that freedom, and they're drawn to it, whether it's economic opportunity, whether it's fleeing persecution and danger. The idea of the United States of America as the place where you can be free, in many senses of that word, is what drives, I think, everybody in this. We want folks who want to protect what they perceive as our hard-earned freedom here in the United States, but then I think we also ought to be taking seriously the idea that we are that beacon in the world.
Representative Scheuren, what do you think? Why do Americans have the perception they have about immigration?
Thank you very much for having me on today. I appreciate the invite. I think Americans are passionate about immigration now more than ever because of all the controversy that is surrounding the issue. We have a lot going on in America today, and people are struggling financially. With inflation, cost of goods, cost of utilities, cost of gas, you name it. And when they see the border being overrun and apparently not many of our immigration laws being enforced, it is compounding the effect of what are they paying for? What is this costing them? What is this doing to their school systems where their children go? How is this impacting their families and their daily lives? Because quite frankly, every state has become a border state with the topic of immigration. Although we are the shining beacon on the hill, the American people want people to come into this country the right way, legally.
Well, Representative Scheuren, let's get back to what you said a moment ago. You said that there are laws currently not being enforced. So what are those laws? Be as specific as possible.
Well, the reality is the federal government has a responsibility to vet the people that are coming into this country. And when we have immigrants crossing at record numbers, 300,000 just in December of 2023, you can't expect the American people to believe that we have a strong handle on the people who are coming in at legal ports of entry, not to mention illegal ports of entry, crossing wherever they want to.
Representative Hohenstein, what do you think as far as current laws that they exist, but they're not being enforced? That's what Representative Scheuren said.
Well, the reason that we have a crisis is, again, the United States has always been the place where people come when they are tempest-tossed. The idea of the Statue of Liberty, that's our ideal. When that upheaval that's happening in our country and is also reflected around the world, yes, then folks will be coming here. As to whether you're talking about enforcement of those laws, I can tell you, as an immigration attorney for many years, those laws are pretty strictly enforced, and the authorities who have the responsibility for that are taking that responsibility extremely seriously. They do record numbers of interdictions. There are detention centers. We can discuss the humanity of that, but or the humaneness of it. But there's detention centers, and there is a record amount of actual enforcement. What we lack is the what I would call the pressure valve. For years, since the 40s and 50s, American immigration law was characterized by about every 10 years or so, 8 to 10 years, there would be a new federal law that would release the pressure. So in 1950, we had the McCarran-Walters Act, and that established some of these basic procedures that we still have in place today. We haven't really changed it. But in 1965, there was a legalization bill. In 1972, there were bills for Cubans. In 1980, we adopted the formal asylum procedures. In 1986, under President Reagan, we had an entire industry for agricultural workers who were legalized. And that type of pressure valve release of what is a traditional and standard ebb and flow of immigration hasn't been reset in decades. And we had an opportunity about 16 years ago with President Bush to have a very strong compromise piece of legislation that would have beefed up enforcement, but also provided additional legal visas, because the numbers are based on projections and rates that are, again, decades old.
And this would have acted as a pressure valve back then?
Yeah. In 2007, if we had passed that bill, then we wouldn't have needed to do a Dreamers Act. We wouldn't have needed to do any of these other executive measures. And it's really that the U.S. Congress has not acted in so long that is creating the pressure. And I certainly understand when folks are talking about, look, my bills are going up. This is happening. I don't know where my job is going to be. But when you look at immigration overall, and in Pennsylvania specifically, our immigrants are actually driving a lot of our economic activity, our entrepreneurship. They pay taxes. And this is whether you have legal documentation or something in the middle, or you don't have any documentation. Immigrants are paying taxes. Whenever they pay sales taxes and fill up their tank of gas, yeah, they're paying the same taxes everybody else does. But so that idea of the worry is something that, if we handle immigration properly, we actually can see an economic boom.
Representative Scheuren, what do you think of Representative Hohenstein's metaphor about having a pressure valve release pressure periodically on immigration?
Well, I certainly appreciate the representative's optimism, but the key phrase that he just used in wrapping up his dissertation was, if we're handling immigration properly. I would venture to say we are not. We are not handling immigration properly when we have immigrants being shipped to states where the governors are not even aware of the number of illegal immigrants that are coming into their state, whether they're being bussed in, whether they're being trained in, or whether they're being flown in the middle of the night, so that people are unaware of just how many immigrants are coming into their state. We also have an immense uptick in drugs and criminal violence and trafficking, human trafficking. If we were handling the border correctly, we would not be seeing all the upticks in drugs, violence, crime coming to our states and coming to our cities. This is all a direct result of our inability to handle the influx of immigrants crossing in legal and illegal points of entry.
Representative Hohenstein, let's start with Representative Scheuren's point about immigration to states. In her words, or rather to sum up what she was saying, it's not being monitored closely, that immigrants are often arriving in states, well, unannounced, without any notice at all.
The concept of the ghost flight is, frankly, a complete distraction. It's not actually happening in that way.
The ghost flight is a plane with illegal immigrants on board.
Yeah.
That's the idea. Anyway, you saying it doesn't happen?
They don't happen. And people know when it's coming in. And in addition, the decision by some governors of certain states to send up and bus up, those are the ones where, people in Pennsylvania, we don't know if Governor Abbott's sending up busloads of folks. So when we talk about the concept of human trafficking, it's almost as if the state governments themselves are the ones involved in this, because they're not paying attention. Now, do they need more support in doing so? Yes, they do. And we do need to pay attention to that. But we have to do it with a sense of the humanity of the situation. And then the other place I really want to make sure we make clear here is there is absolutely no connection between our drug use or our drug crises and immigration. I represent parts of Kensington where we have an opioid epidemic and a drug epidemic that is killing people. The people involved in that are all U.S. citizens. I would say about half of them come from Philly, half of them come from other places in the United States. And that situation had nothing to do with immigration, it had everything to do with opioid manufacturers and pharmaceuticals basically creating a market for drugs that were first legal and now are not. And that's really where our problem is. It has nothing to do with immigration.
Representative Scheuren, what do you think about that? Representative is saying that he's minimizing concerns about crime or illegal drugs coming across the southern border.
I respectfully disagree. The numbers are astronomical. The cartels are making a fortune. They're sending people to the border. These people have obligations once they arrive. They have, they have to sell the drugs when they get here. They have to pay thousands and thousands of dollars to the cartel who help them cross the border. And quite frankly, if our immigration system was working, you asked in the very beginning of this interview why people are so passionate about immigration. The mere fact that they are getting a court date to appear that could be 5, 6, 7, 8 years in the future. Americans are sick and tired of thinking that somebody can be here for that period of time, that the American government will keep track of them, will know where they are at all times, that they'll actually appear on that court date. We don't have the manpower with the reductions in ICE itself and the border agents to be able to follow these people the whole time they're here. It's a passionate argument on both sides of the aisle, But the American people want common sense applied to this problem. We want people to come here legally. We want people properly vetted. We do not want to have major catastrophes happen in various parts of the country just because we're turning a blind eye in wanting to give every single person from every single country the opportunity to come to the shining beacon on the hill. Yes, immigrants are an important part of our economy when vetted and applied correctly, but it's not crazy for Americans or Pennsylvanians to want people to immigrate properly.
Representative Hohenstein, I want to get back to your idea of having a pressure valve that lets off pressure periodically. And you went through a timetable, a calendar of things that have happened in the last 50 or even 70 years as far as immigration is concerned. So let's bring it up to date as much as possible. What kind of pressure valve are we due for right now as far as immigration is concerned, in your opinion?
Well, on the federal level, dealing with anyone who has DACA. If you think of the Dreamers Act, and again, they call themselves Dreamers because they believe in the American dream. These are people who were brought over as children and have for the last 12 years or so been permitted to have a temporary work authorization. But what that temporary work authorization means is a constant source of stress. It has to be renewed every year. It has to be checked. If you're talking about being vetted, every single time someone receives a new employment authorization card every single year, their biometrics are being checked. All of their records are being checked before they get issued that card, and there are delays in that process. So that is pretty basic right there. If we're looking at the state level, there's a couple of pieces of legislation from my colleagues. One from Representative Cepeda Freites that would provide for certification of teachers. And these are, again, people who have been educated in Pennsylvania and have connections to our country. They may not have that permanent resident visa yet, but they deserve the opportunity to enter into a profession where we have a labor shortage. Our teachers. We
Pennsylvania needs teachers anyway.
And there's a similar bill for rural doctors from Representative Vencott that would expand the numbers and improve the attractiveness of our rural medical programs for doctors. And that does nothing but help entire communities when you can keep a hospital, when you can keep a medical facility moving, and have it be again, an anchor in a community. Then you see having immigrants then creates a stronger community throughout. And that happens all across Pennsylvania and all across the United States.
Representative Scheuren, what's your opinion there? If Pennsylvania needs teachers anyway, doesn't this stand to be a logical way to recruit more teachers?
I think the issue is when we constantly look at the immigration issue with rose-colored glasses, we're combining and mixing the people who want to come to this country, chase the American dream, become a teacher, become a doctor, with the ones who are refusing to give the respect to our local officials, that are giving the middle finger, so to speak, to our police. When we have our district attorneys and our criminal prosecutors that refuse to hold immigrants accountable when they commit crimes, when they let them out with absolutely no bail. All of these issues are compounding, and they are making the suburbs, not just the cities, they are bringing crime and fears into the American people who simply want the laws to be upheld, people to be held accountable, personal responsibility to be brought back into the equation, immigrants exported from this country if they cannot abide by the laws as they are written, both in the state and the federal level. And when we constantly merge the two, instead of making sure that those completely disregarding the laws as written, or one of the main instruments, which led to my bill, Homeowner Protection and Squatter Eviction Act, when we have illegal immigrants like Lionel Moreno encouraging everyone from around the world on his TikTok video to come to the U.S. and take advantage of the extreme lax laws that we have in place with squatting. We can't talk about the positives without talking about the incredible negatives that are overrunning our country right now.
Representative Donna Scheuren and Representative Joe Hohenstein, thank you very much. We're going to give you a break just for a minute while we look at program notes for PCN. On the issues has Wayne Reich, CEO of the PA Nurses Association. He'll tell us about the priorities of Pennsylvania's nurses on Wednesday at 7 p.m. Then right after that, we'll have Representative Mike Armanini on business startup legislation. He's at 7:30 p.m. Thursday Journalist Roundtable has Ryan Dido from the Pittsburgh Tribune-Review, Anthony Hennon from the Center Square, and Jan Murphy from Penn Live. That's Thursday at 7 p.m. PCN's Salute to the Military is back. With a tax-deductible donation to PCN, you can recognize a veteran or active service member. A special tribute with their name, photo, rank, branch, and years of service will appear on PCN and our website from Armed Services Day in May through the 4th of July. This year's package also includes a keepsake pin and certificate. For more information, visit pcntv.com/salute to the military. Now, be careful to include hyphens, just as you see here. The public affairs coverage you watch on PCN TV is now free on the internet. Go to pcntv.com and check out our streaming service, PCN Select. PCN is a 501c3 nonprofit television network that receives no government funding. We rely on viewers and donors like you to help PCN bring you everything Pennsylvania. To make a donation, visit pcntv.com. Now we're talking about immigration today, and Representative Scheuren, I want to go back to you because I want to talk about the bill that you mentioned a couple minutes ago, which has to do with squatters in Pennsylvania. What is that bill trying to do?
So my bill goes after the homeowners, those of us that have chased the American dream, have their greatest asset, their home, being subject to criminal behavior, and the definition of squatting being invading a person's home, taking advantage of it, refusing to leave, whether it's by a falsified lease or whether it's by just barricading oneself into the home. And the current laws as written, they don't give many protections to the homeowner. They don't give the rights to the police officers to be able to go in and remove the squatter from the home. So my bill changes that and puts the law back in the hands of the municipal police officers or the state troopers to go in, remove an illegal squatter from a person's home simply by a signed affidavit of the legal homeowner that he or she is the rightful owner. Now, they would face criminal charges themselves if the information was falsified. But upon that affidavit, it removes having to go to court. It removes the homeowner from having to prove that the lease is fake, falsified, that they are not a tenant, they are not in a landlord relationship. And it also allows the homeowner to go after restitution, right? Treble damages that might be done. We've all seen the images. We've all seen the circumstances where squatters take over somebody's home and destroy it, do tens and tens of $1,000s worth of damage. This allows and gives restitution to the homeowner to go after it.
Representative Hohenstein, what do you think of Representative Scheuren's bill, especially in the context of our show today, immigration?
It doesn't have anything to do with immigration. This is a bill that's been put forth before. I know in looking at previous versions of this, one of the problems with it was there wasn't a protection for people going through domestic violence situations, and that certification that would come from the homeowner or landowner didn't necessarily provide protection from someone who they were in a relationship with, and there was an abusive situation. It actually, so there were a lot of reasons why this didn't move before, but more to the point, this doesn't really have anything to do with immigrants or immigration. I know there's been TikTok videos and things like that, but one of the things we've got to recognize is there's a reality and then there's a perception of reality. And the reality is that the vast majority of people who don't have the United States as their country of birth, whether they have legal papers or not legal papers, those folks go about their business being good neighbors, being good citizens, even if they're not legally citizens. They do things like they report crimes when crimes happen. And so I've got a bill that would provide a regular process for the legal visa that you can get when you are a crime victim. And that's something that we would like to see happen in Pennsylvania, because I think that's actually what makes our communities safer, when we encourage people to come together and to protect their neighbors and to protect themselves if they've been victims of crime.
Representative Scheuren, before we take our first phone call, how about a brief rebuttal?
Thank you very much. So the actual merits in the bill state specifically that if in fact the squatter is an illegal immigrant, that ICE has to be notified for all detainers. Yes, these people can just be criminals in our country, premeditative behavior to go in and take somebody's home from them and live there through an invasion. But with regards to immigration, it absolutely should be stipulated that if those squatters are illegal immigrants, they should be removed from our country for, again, breaking the laws of personal responsibility, as well as the assets of the taxpaying citizens in the Commonwealth. Let's not forget that our U.S. Senator, John Fetterman, came right out in his last interview with the New York Post and said, we need to stop pretending that squatters have any rights whatsoever in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania.
All right, Representative Scheuren, let's keep moving. And we're going to take our first call. It's from Robert in Clearfield. Go ahead.
Hi, thank you. Thank you. Panelists, I'm watching the discussion here. He said on both sides of the issue. I mean, an open door policy, you can't manage it. Building a wall across the southern border, they've proven conclusively that they can go under it, over it, or around it. But nobody seems to really want to go after the heart of the problem that's driving all those people northward. Number one, overpopulation. Just too many people relative to the resources of those nations. Diminishing resources. The closer you get to the equator, the more vulnerable they are to climate change. And these are agrarian economies. And a lack, as I said, of effective central governments to actually manage and provide services and law enforcement. Until you can sit down in there and start right there to solve that trouble, all the other stuff that both sides of are jawing back and forth is totally meaningless.
Representative Hohenstein, you go first.
Yeah, I agree. And first of all, just to be clear, I'm not advocating any type of open door policy. There is a proper balance for enforcement and incentive, and I think we need to have an immigration policy that does reflect that. And my points previously have been, we haven't given any proper like a carrot as opposed to a stick in over 40 years in any way effectively on the federal level. But your point about the pressure that comes up because other countries are suffering economically and with social upheaval, I can tell you firsthand, when people come across the border, as tough and as difficult and as harrowing as that experience is, and it is traumatic, remaining where they are is even worse. And I've heard so many stories and been able to present so many different cases for people who are fleeing the horrendous conditions. And our government, especially in the Central American and in Caribbean areas that many of our immigrants are coming to us from, we have really direct responsibility for what has occurred in some of those governments. And I'm not saying we need to go in and democratize everything, but what we do have to do is support real democracy, real development in those spaces. And then I think we will find that some of that upward pressure is reducing. And the final point the caller made about population growth and overpopulation, immigrants right now in Pennsylvania actually kept us from losing congressional seats in the last redistricting, because our population growth, to the extent we had it, came exclusively in immigrant and foreign-born populations. Our traditional, white and black populations each saw declines over the 10 years before 2020, and the only reason we kept representation was because we also had increases in population due to immigrant and first and second generation immigrants.
Representative Scheuren, what did you think about the caller's concerns about overpopulation in other countries? Those immigrants are fleeing those countries, and also diminishing resources there. The caller says, we got to think about that.
Well, one thing's for sure is I agree wholeheartedly about diminishing resources. However, going off on what I believe and perceive as a tangent to imply that all these countries where we're having immigrants come from, that we have a responsibility, or that we in some way, shape, or form are contributing to the problems that are happening in some of those countries, I think is way off the mark of this discussion that we're having here today. We send billions and billions and billions of dollars to foreign countries, whether or not it makes it to where it's supposed to get, whether or not that's a level of corruption that exceeds our dollars from getting where they need to be. The bottom line is we do not have the border agents that we need to handle this influx. We do not have the police forces in our states and our cities. We do not have the court systems that can handle the influx of these appearances that these illegal immigrants are supposed to make. I touched on that earlier. They're out multiple years, and we don't even know if any of these people will appear. We're on track to probably have 2 million people enter within a year's time, if not more, and those being the ones that are crossing an illegal point of entry. It's absurd. We need to get a handle on it, and we need to stop it until we can fight it, vet people, handle it at a level that makes sense to stop every single state in our union from becoming a border state.
Representative Scheuren, House Republicans want to outlaw sanctuary cities, and just give us a very brief review of what a sanctuary city is.
Well, the sanctuary cities are basically areas where the leaders, mayors, if you will, are welcoming immigrants into their cities free from any kind of prosecution or report to ICE, or turning their backs, if you will, on the federal immigration laws in that particular city, thus creating, in my mind, exactly what Representative Hohenstein was mentioning in the very beginning of this, the actions of a Governor Abbott. How can we, as representatives in Pennsylvania, blame the man who does not sign up to be a sanctuary city and is overrun to such extremes that his towns can't even get the services, the food, the supplies that they need because of the massive amounts of immigrants sleeping in shelters, sleeping on the streets, sleeping on the sidewalks? What choice does that man have, honestly, other than to send all of these immigrants to these cities that clearly state they are sanctuary cities and welcome these immigrants? They land, they arrive, and then these mayors go ballistic. How does that make any common sense to anyone to fault the governor of Texas for doing exactly what he did?
Go ahead, Representative Hohenstein.
I fault the governor of Texas if he didn't know that he's living just north of Mexico all these years and know what that situation has been. This isn't a new situation. It is a bit more, it's increased in volume to a degree, but it's not a new situation. And you create the structures to do the movement of people, of human beings, in a humane way. That's what he's being faulted for. There is, I think, an argument for making sure our states get the proper support from the federal government in order to be able to address the impact of these new populations. But that doesn't give the governor of one of those states the right to dump on his fellow governors and fellow citizens, again, without regard for the fact that what is being sent up from Texas to different places are human beings, people. And I think that's really where it is in terms of opposing what he's doing, because he's pretending like this problem is brand new, and then the solution is not to extend any type of humanity to the people who are crossing, but rather than to treat them like cattle and ship them up, and that's wrong. So I think a big piece of this that is a problem is the perception that immigration is a criminal system, and it is not. For most of our history, we actually didn't even have a border guard, or the border was there, but it wasn't something that people had to man and arm. And even now, the immigration process, the removal process in immigration court is a civil process, not a criminal one. And the perception of criminality leads people to look at immigrants and essentially, instead of being like, I put it this way, I don't have rose-colored glasses. I'm trying to look at this as clearly as I can. But there's an equally dangerous way to look at something than rose-colored glasses, is to look at it through dark, fear-clouded glasses. And we can't be looking at this with fear, because if we do that, our fears will be realized. The only way hopes get realized is if you have them, and then you can act on them.
Representative Hohenstein, I'd like you to comment on what our minority leader, Brian Cutler, said, and try to make it brief, please, because our time is limited.
Sure.
He said that having sanctuary cities, in effect, moves the national border to your own neighborhood. What do you think of that?
It doesn't, because there's still that physical geography, and there's still the idea that the federal government is the one that is handling this issue and should handle this issue predominantly. I do think that there needs to be a better discussion, because the current system isn't working at all. But I think the reason for that is not that we need an open border, but rather that our balance between enforcing a civil immigration system and and again, those ideals that we have about providing opportunity and freedom, we need to have that strike a balance, because until we do, we're going to be hiding the beacon of light that we have under a bushel, and nobody's going to be able to see it.
Representative Scheuren, what did you think of Minority Leader Brian Cutler's remarks?
His remarks are spot on. And with regards to the discussions that have been going on in the last few minutes, it absolutely brings the issue of the border right to your backyard. They may be human beings that are being sent to different states, but more importantly, the human beings, the American citizens that have been affected by the uptick in crime, by the illegal immigrants, certainly has to count for something and has to be more important than any other topic in regards to immigration. We have so many. Look at the crime on the college campuses. Look at what do you say to all the parents who have lost their students, who have had their children murdered or raped by illegal immigrants that were not stopped, that were deported, that came back across the border, that were let out on bail, that were released with no bail, turned back onto the streets after the police turned them in. What do we say to those families? Their children, their spouses, their family members should be here today. Bringing every state into the fold of this border crisis makes us all sanctuary cities when we do not institute the rule of law as it exists on the books. Shame on us.
Representative Hohenstein, you're in the majority. 30 seconds to end our discussion.
I think the key here is we have an opportunity with our immigrant population in Pennsylvania. We have a couple of good bills that can help us all economically. A teacher shortage, a doctor shortage. We can provide in-state tuition to kids who have grown up American in all senses of the word, except for the accident of where they were born. So there are things we can do on the state level that will support appropriate immigration enforcement and making sure that we're staying safe. I will tell you, we all want to make sure we stay safe. We stay safe when we make as many of the people who are living in and around us feel welcome and safe themselves.
Representative Donna Scheuren, Republican from Montgomery County, and Representative Joe Hohenstein, Democrat from Philadelphia. Thanks for joining us. PCN's Ellen Franz talked to Representative Zachary Mako about helping the Corrections Department find ways to save money.
Welcome to our program. What led you to propose this bill?
So during the appropriations hearings, when we had Department of Corrections come in, we noticed and identified some deficiencies. And speaking with the Department of Corrections, they would said that they'd be willing to undergo an audit through the Inspector General.
If the Department of Corrections keeps asking for money every year, where does the money go to that they ask for?
And that's pretty much where we're, as the legislature, coming from. We want to make sure that these funds are being allocated correctly and efficiently as possible. Department of Corrections is the third largest line item in the general fund.
We have been hearing a lot about some incidents of safety for prisoners at the Department of Corrections. How would an additional oversight impact their safety and well-being?
We don't know, but that would be one of the key points of this audit, is to help identify inmate safety, their health, mental health, and how to best address that, and really be able to take care of those people that are under Department of Corrections.
Your office's press release about this bill mentions that it is part of a back to basics government reform package. What is the goal of this package?
So, the package ultimately is just, not to steal the words of the package, but it's back to basics, doing what government should be doing, focusing on the programs that we already have in place instead of coming up with new programs and new allocations. Let's just get what we're already doing correct. And I think that's the best and most efficient way we can use the taxpayers' dollars, is by making sure what we're already doing is right.
And where is this bill in the legislature now?
Just being drafted right now. We'll have a co-sponsored memo go out, and then it'll be assigned a committee and a number. So just being drafted.
So just for clarification, does the Department of Corrections not get audited now, or this is just a second audit that would happen for them?
I'm not entirely too sure on that. I feel like I don't know enough about it. I just know that when we spoke, they said that they'd be open for an audit to go over their finances and their operationals. So I would imagine that there's some, but not like an overarching of the whole department.
Is there anything that you're hoping to find in an audit of the Department of Corrections?
Anytime you're doing an audit, hopefully we can find some deficiencies. Once again, we're not looking to get people in trouble. We're just looking to make sure that we have the most efficient process in Department of Corrections. So, yeah.
Is there any plans at all for public hearings on this bill?
Absolutely. We can do a public hearing. If someone wants to do it, absolutely. We can do a public hearing if we're asked, yeah.
Representative Zachary Mako, thank you for your time.
Ellen, thank you for the interview. I appreciate it.
Before we go, here's a reminder for you about On the Issues. The topic will be Pennsylvania Nurses' Priorities with Wayne Reich, CEO of the PA Nurses Association. He'll be here on Wednesday at 7 p.m. Then right after that, we'll have Representative Mike Armanini on business startup legislation at 7:30 p.m. That's it for the PCN Capitol Preview. I'm Larry Casper. Thanks for watching.